So there was this real serious crisis and realization that I personally don't have enough money to help all these people. But if we're really going to, I think, help other people in the world, it's partly about giving them something that we take for granted in the United States, which is trusted investable assets that are actually going to allow you to make money on the money that you have already worked so hard to get. And so Dinari was really founded on this idea that can you bring that to the rest of the world using some of the blockchain technologies?
Today's guest is Gabe Otte, the co-founder and CEO of Dinari. Dinari is tokenizing stocks, ETFs, and more to make the U.S. stock market accessible across the globe. It's available on the Ethereum mainnet, Base, Arbitrum, Blast, and Kinto across 60-plus countries. And I'm excited to have Gabe on the show today. Gabe, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. There's been a lot of news recently with Dinari, but before we get into that, can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you even got into Web3?
Oh boy. So the company was founded in late 21. I had finished with my previous company, which was in the biotech space, which is where I had we were doing cancer diagnostics. The company was quite successful, and I was there in my early 30s, basically saying, "Okay, what now?" And turns out what now is actually pretty hard to figure out when your job has been like, I'm going into work to cure cancer. That's like literally what I told myself for a decade. And so there was quite a bit of exploring there for some time. One of the things that I really delve into was my faith. So I was part of the Orthodox Church since I was 10. And I started going to seminary to sort of study more about my faith in that time. I also happened to start giving away a lot of the money that I had made and traveling to various parts of the world, doing work there. And one of the things that I really realized was most of the world really have no concept of what passive income looks like, what investments look like. They can't even trust the quote unquote investable assets that are being offered to them by their local brokers. And access to US stocks was still quite difficult. You know, in many cases, you had to have like a US denominated bank account, which how many people, you know, in the world can really get access to that? So there was this real serious crisis and realization that I personally don't have enough money to help all these people. But if we're really going to, I think, help other people in the world, it's partly about giving them something that we take for granted in the United States, which is trusted investable assets that are actually going to allow you to make money on the money that you have already worked so hard to get. And so Dinari was really founded on this idea that these investable assets like US stocks, very trusted, highly liquid. Can you bring that to the rest of the world using some of the blockchain technologies?
Why do you think, and maybe this is a question for American lawmakers, but it hasn't been accessible beyond the US market? And how is it that Dinari allows it to be accessible in a way that I imagine is regulated and totally secure and legitimate, right?
Sure. So, so there's two answers to that question. One is on the U.S. part where they rightly don't want foreign takeovers of U.S. public companies. That would be suboptimal. So they want to kind of limit and certainly control the flow of capital there. The other answer is on the side of the countries themselves that are kind of preventing U.S. investable assets from entering into their countries. And that concept is called capital control, where they basically don't want their local currency devalued, right? And if somebody, I don't know, take for example Malaysia, the local currency is ringgit. If people in Malaysia want to invest in U.S. stocks, they have to convert those ringgits into U.S. dollars, and then the ringgits get devalued relative to the US dollar. That's something that Malaysia as a country doesn't necessarily want. So both sides play a role in sort of limiting investable assets.
Hmm.
The second part of your question about, okay, how does tokenization or anything like this solve this problem? Well, to a certain extent, what it allows is almost an automation of something that we traditionally use to move stocks across borders. And these are called depository receipts. So these are highly regulated. They're usually chunked. So like banks would buy essentially a block of stocks and then essentially expose interest in that block of stocks to the local investors. It's limited generally to high net worths. It's limited in terms of how many shares you can invest in, things like that. Well, tokenization in some ways enables that to happen in real time, in a way that is trusted, in a way that is tracked, in a way that can comply with the local regulatory concerns on both sides of the equation.
Hmm. Okay. Where does the name Dinari come from? Is it any special meaning?
Oh, I was listening to a sermon at the time, and they were talking about Dinari, which was the currency of the Roman Empire that often gets talked about in the Bible. So,
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
you're still religious?
Yes, I actually got ordained a couple of years back.
Oh, wow.
I'm an ordained minister, a deacon in the Orthodox Church.
Wow. Does that play any role in how you operate a business, like bringing in religion and God? Because honestly, we haven't had a guest come on and talk about this. So I'm curious.
Oh, not explicitly. It's it's
Mhm.
not like I talk about God at work or anything along those lines.
I mean, hey,
It's
you could do that.
yeah. I mean, but I guess not overtly.
Uh-huh.
I do. Perhaps I have a different philosophy than a lot of my Silicon Valley counterparts in terms of what I think are important in a company.
Mhm.
So maybe it filters in that way. Um,
Right.
I think, generally speaking, in my current experience and in my previous experience of running companies, it's really important for everyone in the company to understand what is the North Star of the company itself. And the North Star for Denari has always been, we are all about making accessible, trusted assets to people who don't have access
Mhm.
to those assets. And so, for as long as that's the North Star, so many other things about the business might change over time, but we will generally go in the right direction if we can keep focus on that. So I think that mission is kind of rooted in what I saw in the context of my work and my faith and all this stuff. But outside of that, I'm not sure if we talk about faith overtly in the business.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. I also think your background in healthcare is super interesting too. And essentially, you were helping cure cancer as well. I don't think there's many overlaps in the crypto space like that. I know there's like decentralized science and things of that nature, but I think your path towards what you're building today is definitely different. That's how I would define it.
I I appreciate that. I don't think it's unique. In fact, actually,
You think a lot of people go from healthcare to crypto?
well, I know for a fact there's at least one other person,
Okay.
which is Balaji,
Uh-huh.
because Balaji started a company called Council, which
Mhm.
is in the women's health company. And funny story, the headquarters of Council was like right across the street from the headquarters of Freenome, my company.
Mhm.
And in fact, that's how we met. Is Balaji owned the domain
Mhm.
freenome.com when I started that company. And so I met him in that context where he was actually really kind. He gave me the Freenome domain for free.
Oh.
But we basically worked together in various capacities in that context in healthcare before he went over to Coinbase. And then I was a few years behind in terms
Mhm.
of coming over to the space. But we would often have these conversations about the future of finance and the role that blockchain would play in that. And this was around the time when Ethereum was coming out
Mhm.
in 2015, 2016. And so there were a lot of fun conversations, both in healthcare and in crypto
Okay.
at the time.
Fair
So
enough. Fair enough. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. For fintechs, neobanks, wealth platforms, and so on, what would you say is the biggest roadblock today when it comes to accessing US equities? And what do you hope that Dinari can do to kind of bring that in? We talked about it briefly in the beginning, and obviously there is that natural barrier from the traditional stock market. But I do believe, to your point, tokenization, bringing these things on chain, actually make it a lot more accessible. But what are the other roadblocks that you think are still something that you have to battle and kind of overcome to bring in or take down these barriers?
I think the obvious answer is there's still regulatory clarity that we need to get both in the United States and other parts of the world. But I would say that perhaps a more fundamental barrier is almost everyone that we talk to, I think both in crypto and in fintech, agrees kind of the optimal outcome and the end state of where this is headed. And that is tokenization represents a universal language for assets. So it doesn't matter whether it's bonds, doesn't matter, stocks, private or public, real estate, debt, whatever it is. If they're tokenized, all of a sudden they're interoperable in a way that traditional rails just are not, right? Banking rails are kind of its own thing. DTCC for stocks is kind of its own thing. Private stocks don't even really have rails, and neither does really debt and these other things outside of certain banks. And so when you think about all these sort of disparate infrastructure for various different assets, that is inefficiency. And so when people in finance talk about what is the power of blockchain and tokenization and what role does it play, everyone seems to agree on the end state, right? End state is we break down all these inefficiencies and we have these rails that are kind of unified, so that all of a sudden people can trade bonds for stocks, public stocks from private stocks, real estate from public stocks directly, like all those kinds of things. That would be fantastic. For my part, for anyone who has ever dealt with wealth management, you know how desperate this is. You know how terrible these systems are, how opaque they are. You're paying somebody some money to manage your money, and you don't know how much money you have because it's spread across different bank accounts. You don't know how to move money very efficiently. So, like, all those kinds of things will eventually be solved.
Mm-hmm.
The barrier to getting there is not only regulatory, right? It's actually liquidity in the different class of assets. It's about the incumbents either playing ball with it or having to sort of say that, we're not going to go into that territory, but we're also not going to interfere with people that are going into the territory. That disruption, sort of an industry level disruption, is the major barrier right now. I think once everything flips over, we are looking at a very different world.
So how do you solve for that?
How do we solve for that? Well, to me, I would like to bring everyone along. Not everyone shares that, right? I tend to believe that rising tides raise all boats. I really do, right? And so, maybe we work with DTCC to sort of help them on some of this stuff. But like everyone's kind of got their fiefdoms, and I think that's sort of the challenge. So what organically happens in every industry that's been disrupted is some people will see the future and want to play ball, some incumbents, other incumbents won't. And so we will work with whatever incumbents that want to work with us to bring about this future, and the others will go by the wayside. So it's just about picking the right partners, picking like-minded partners to sort of row and drive forward into the future together.
And do you think we're at that point, maybe that like inflection point where things actually are going to expand and hit that like escape velocity?
Oh, I sure hope so, because I mean that's the bet that we're making at Dinari, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Where are you seeing the most demand from users today? And for like which financial on-chain products or services?
So for us, our model is we have apps that are integrating using our APIs to offer their users stock trading, U.S.
Mm-hmm.
stock trading. So some of them are neobanks, some of them are money transmitters, some of them are just wanting to be super apps of their own country, and so generally speaking, the demand of these apps, right? That's kind of what we track. Very heavy in Latin America, which kind of makes sense because they're already used to transacting in stable coins.
Mm-hmm.
Very heavy in Southeast Asia. So Indonesia, Malaysia, even Pakistan. We were the first ones to offer U.S. stock trading to retail investors in Pakistan with a partner called Facet. So I think generally speaking, it's these regions that really don't have access. However, what we have been surprised by is we've also gotten demand from like UAE, where there are already, traditional ways of doing stock trading. However, because of the inefficiencies that I've mentioned before, maybe the cost structure is not as efficient, and we're able to do more of a direct transaction with them. So it's been surprising, and those are kind of larger ticket orders that are coming in that we didn't initially anticipate.
Mm-hmm. So you see a lot of growth opportunities in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the UAE. Are there other regions that you're interested in expanding in, or?
I mean, obviously, China and India are big markets. I'm not sure if regulatorily we can access those anytime soon. That's something that we're in discussions.
Mm-hmm. What about Europe and Asia?
I think, well, I mean, so China and India, I guess, would make up,
Europe
a
and
huge.
Africa. I'm sorry, I said Asia.
Sorry. Yeah.
Europe and Africa.
So the African market actually has been growing. It's not as big right now as South America, but part of the reason why is we don't have as many partners that have reached out to us from Africa yet, but more and more so. So very excited about that. Europe, I am sure there is a market in Europe. However, again, what is the North Star? And in our limited resources, where are we going to spend our time? I think Europe, people in Europe have other ways of gaining access to this, and I am sure through our efficiencies we can bring them better fee structures and things along those lines. But because we have a limited amount of resources, when we're kind of rank ordering which regions we want to go into, I would say Europe is probably lower on the list.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, why do you think certain markets want access to U.S. equities? Obviously, you mentioned in the beginning, there's like massive liquidity there and they're extremely strong on that front. But why would they want that opposed to maybe like their local stock market, for example?
The biggest companies are here. I mean, that sounded very American of me, but
I mean, yeah, if you look at it from like an actual like revenue and market cap, yes, the data points to that. Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's that element of it. I think the other element of it is post the 1920s, when we sort of empowered the SEC to, shall we say, bring a certain level of transparency to our public companies. Today we kind of look at it and it's like, are they a little bit overbearing? But at the same time, those initial regulatory frameworks allowed the stock market to grow to what it is today. And I think that level of trust that gets built from something like that is something that most of the world don't have to the same extent. And therefore that, look, if you're going to fork over a bunch of money and invest in something, you want it to be as trusted and transparent as possible. I think U.S. assets have a certain bar for that, which is really, really enticing to, say somebody in Argentina, where maybe they've been disappointed time and again about, what can and cannot be trusted with respect to their local governments.
Yeah. Obviously, Americans can just go and tap into the U.S. stock market. I could go grab my phone right now, download an exchange, and buy whatever. Do you see an opportunity for users in the US as well? Like, would you like to tap into that market, even though we could access it one way? Do you see like cutting out these intermediaries and inefficiencies as like an opportunity to expand stateside as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Though not in the same way. So let me explain.
Remember trying to move your assets between chains, watching the minutes tick by, wondering if your transaction would make it? Yeah, we've all been there. But here's the thing. While other bridges feel like taking the scenic route, across is your express lane. Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, boom, boom, boom. Your assets move between them faster than you could say cross-chain. Across isn't just another bridge. When Uniswap needed the fastest, most reliable way to move assets cross-chain, they chose Across. Now, millions of Uniswap users are swapping between chains without even thinking about it, because that's how it should be. Whether you're moving assets yourself or building the next big thing in crypto, Across makes cross-chain feel like the same chain. No more scenic routes, no more complexity, just 2-second transfers between chains. Ready to join the Express Lane? Head to across.to and experience what bridging should have been all along.
I didn't realize this until I had some money, right?
Go on.
After you have some money, you realize, oh, you don't actually have to sell stock every time you need to, do something with it or something like that. You can borrow against your stock and
Right.
and use it, and there's tax advantages to that, and all that. Most people in America don't have access to any kind of financial vehicle like that, because atomic lending and borrowing, like lending and borrowing against assets that are not super diversified and perhaps small in number, is not a thing today. But as we all know, as we both know here, DeFi enables that.
Right.
There is atomic lending and borrowing. Now, can we allow users to take their stocks and do the same thing, even though they may not have multi-million-dollar assets or something along those lines? That is a world I want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And I think tokenized stocks would enable that. And so being able to offer US clients the ability to do that, so that they can have kind of the same tax advantages of some of the sort of wealthier people in the US and things like that, that gets me excited.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the timeline is for that?
That's for the SEC to answer.
Not for Dinari to answer? You guys are going to wait until there's clarity on that front then?
I think the answer is ASAP, and I think there's a difference between like 100% regulatory clarity versus 50, 60, 80% clarity. I think we're not going to wait till 100% clarity, but we certainly don't want to harm customers or anything along those lines. So like that's going to be our first priority, and we're going to work with the regulators to make sure that whatever we're doing is safe enough. But whenever we're pushing the envelope, somebody somewhere is not going to like it. And so if that's the barrier, that's not going to stop us from doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Since 2021 to now, Dinari has been operating in the space. How would you characterize its growth and journey as both the founder and then someone living and building in the US? What kind of has been the evolution of it all?
Yeah, so the pithy answer is 3 years of depression and like 1 year of like really exciting, things happening.
I hope it was good depression. I don't know. There's no such thing as good depression.
It's just hard work. I would say that back in 21 when we started the company, the term tokenized securities was basically like Voldemort. Like you're not supposed to say it, right? And so the it was a really interesting time to start a company like Dinari, because basically every meeting that I was in, people were telling me tokenized securities will never be a thing. And I'm not just talking about regulators. I'm talking about all these other companies that are now saying tokenized securities is the future.
Well, saying securities was like a red flag enough. People would run the other way. So
right. And so at a time when everyone else was doing that, we were actually going out and saying, this is what we're doing. And we were talking to the regulators and saying, this is what we're doing. And so in some ways that was very, very difficult. It's the um it's kind of a cliche type of a thing, but like, if you want to be a founder of a company, you really need to be kind of robust against everyone telling you you're stupid and doing something that's never going to work. And it was kind of that was the thing that we were living through for many years. We were just quietly building, quietly pushing through. We became a registered transfer agent of the SEC in 2022.
Hmm.
Um, when everyone
It's like
else would have
3 years ago.
said,
Yeah.
yeah, when everyone else would have said the regulators were never going to grant you something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so my co-founder Chaz Rampenthal, who was the head legal counsel for a company called LegalZoom for 17 years, I would say I give a lot of credit to him. He really is one of the most creative lawyers I know, and I would say that I don't know if you know about LegalZoom, but like LegalZoom was like the OG of click a button, get a company, right? Like sort of this legal automation type of a thing.
Okay.
And basically they got challenged by pretty much every lawyer in the country because they were like, you want software to practice law? You can't
Hmm.
do that, right? So Chaz is like very comfortable with people telling him legally you can't do this or that, and how do you push the envelope forward without harming customers, but
Right.
still pushing the envelope. And so that's been kind of our strategy: is we're going to push what we can push forward in kind of a responsible way, without doing anything that might harm customers, and we're going to just outlast everyone. That's the idea. So 3 years of that, and then 1 year of just like explosive growth.
Yeah, I'm sure
We
you've been busy in other ways
we
now.
went from yeah, I and so like last year this time we were doing I think something like $1,000 a month in volume or something like that. We're now
Hmm.
doing millions of dollars in volume every month.
Wow. Yeah.
PVL just crossed 60 million, and it continues to grow in terms of the trajectory. We're now the biggest tokenized stock provider in the world,
Wow.
in terms of public U.S. stocks or whatever. And so I think that happened in a very small amount of time, in the last few months. So
Hmm.
it's all very encouraging now. But we have 3 years of trauma, so our team is always like, okay, when is this going to fall apart?
Yeah.
When are the
When
wheels
is
going to
the
come
other
off?
shoe going to drop? Yes.
Yeah.
I know the feeling in just life. But um, why do you think tokenized securities is such a hot narrative right now? You were ahead of the curve, arguably. What do you think you saw early on, and what do you think people are seeing now? And is it aligned with what you're seeing? If you had to take a guess.
Yeah, so kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think everyone is excited by that end state that I was describing. Everything gets tokenized. All of a sudden, we have an exchange where all these different asset classes can trade, and it will be very efficient, and instant settlement. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Finance has always tended towards like, let's be as efficient as possible, right? About these kinds of things. So this is like the ultimate efficiency. And so everyone's kind of getting excited by that. Now, in the short term, what that's translating to some of the people that are tokenizing things is, oh, is there a market that I haven't tapped for the assets that I have? So like I tokenize this and a bunch of people have access. I don't think that narrative is true. I don't think that narrative was true 3 years ago. And that's part of the reason why we built the APIs that we have built, because at the time, 3 years ago, when we were doing this assessment, there were 200 something, I think 230,000 active Ethereum wallets in the world. Right. So like if your entire market is
It's
230,000,
nominal in the grand scheme.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's nothing. And so like if you're looking for tokenization to solve a distribution problem, you're probably going to be disappointed. Even today,
Hmm.
you're probably going to be disappointed. I would say that the goal is using tokenization and blockchain for the efficiency that I was talking about, but making it very accessible to all the users everywhere, which is why we built the API, so that all the apps that all the different people are already using for transmitting money or earning money via payroll or banking or whatever, that's where trading of tokenized securities should live. in a way that is completely abstracted away from the users, but they're reaping the benefits of all the technology behind it.
What would you say is the total addressable market today then?
Of what exactly?
For tokenization and getting people to use on-chain finance? Because you talked about that 200,000 Ethereum addresses. Maybe that was the market back in the day, but where does it stand today?
Well, I think we're already starting to see the merge between fintech and crypto. In fact, I think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, probably those are not going to be seen as different things. I think crypto is going to be synonymous with fintech. And so whatever TAM we're heading towards is probably whatever TAM fintech companies have access to. Today, we're somewhere in the midst of that transition. It's certainly larger than the number of wallets, active wallets that are out there and things like that. Because for us, for example, 98% of our transactions actually come from Web2 apps today, or apps that are Web2 on the back end. They may be wallet apps or something like that, but they're really servicing as a Web2 API. And so the UI UX does matter, and so I would say that it's very quickly merging in terms of the TAM of crypto and TAM of finance.
Okay. I'll hold you to it.
I don't know what that number. I don't know what that number is. So it's not an evasive answer. I just don't know the number. But I do think that it's much bigger than people are anticipating.
Okay. Speaking of numbers, Dinari has over 100 tokenized stocks and ETFs like Tesla, Apple, Nvidia, Meta, Google, and so on, naming the big ones, obviously. What number of tokenized stocks and ETFs would you like to see Dinari hit maybe by the end of 2025 or in general? Do you want it to be all of them or just maybe the best performing ones? How do you think about that?
No, it'll be all of them.
By the end of the year?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty fast.
I love my employees. They work so hard.
And we love them too. Okay, fair enough. How do you think about growth and expanding these asset offerings then to institutional partners or just institutions in general? Are you having conversations with them?
We are. And again, you have to sort of offer them what it is they care about, right? And so things they might care about is if they are operating whatever ETF or something like that, right? They need to be able to balance things quickly in terms of the composition of the ETFs, the underlying stocks. I think we can be the infrastructure to these ETF providers in that regard. That is much more transparent, much easier to sort of access. And by the way, maybe we can be the foundation to ETFs that are actually blending crypto and traditional assets, right? And having that be done in a single platform, as opposed to them manually managing across different platforms. So again, it's institutionals versus apps versus retail customers. They all want different things, but the underlying infrastructure brings efficiencies that everyone kind of want to see. So we're talking to some of these institutionals about these efficiencies that we can bring to whatever operational needs that they have.
Dinari also raised about $12.7 million in a Series A round at the beginning of the year, or I'm sorry, at the beginning of May. What will the funds be used toward if anything new?
Well, after the 3-year, depression period,
you wanted to raise some money, yeah?
I would say what we saw was like things are finally working, right? After kind of grinding, we're like, oh, people actually want this now. And so now that we're seeing that, it's about expanding that as much as possible and scaling that so that we can bring these assets to as many people as possible. So that's where most of it is obviously going to go to, that and product development for people that want to see this. And legal is kind of the last chunk. But I'm really thankful for that Series A. We were going out for 10 million is what we wanted to raise, and obviously some people wouldn't take no for an answer. Which
you just had to take their money.
Well, it's nice to be the belle of the ball sometimes.
Yes, 100%. Amazing. Last thing, Gabe, what is something that you're watching right now that you think others should pay attention to?
I think that we really need to figure out how do we transition from the traditional way of doing things infrastructurally in finance to this new world where everything is sort of on chain. We're seeing that happen with stablecoins. Very soon, the question is going to be asked, and some people are already asking this question. Okay, stablecoin is now legit, and everyone's going to use it. Now what? What do we do with that? And that question, has to do with all these assets that are getting tokenized. But what I see oftentimes is people talking about, oh, we're just gonna, go straight onto on-chain. Security tokens are going to be just like treated like commodities and things like. I don't see that happening anytime soon, right? Like securities laws exist, and I don't think they're going to really go away anytime soon. So the question is how do you work with sort of the traditional framework now that we do have a permissive government that want to see this future happen? And so I think what we're going to see is perhaps more sophisticated iterations of how do we bring this world about in a way that is not completely destructive or separate from the traditional finance world, but actually moving forward with the traditional finance world together, which I know a lot of crypto listeners are going to have an allergic reaction to, but this is the future. This is where we're headed, and in the sort of ideal state, crypto and fintech or crypto and finance become synonymous in a way that leverages the best qualities of both.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can either fight it either on the crypto side or on the traditional finance side and watch the inevitable happen and have no say in how that happens, or you can get on board and help us form what this end state looks like in a way that leverages the best qualities of both. And that's where we want to be, and that's where we urge everyone else to be.
Mm-hmm. Can you leave us with a piece of advice, something that you've carried throughout your time as a founder in this space?
I would say that what we're doing is really at the cutting edge in a way that really turns off certain people in a way that most people may not believe that that's the future and things like that. And that's a really exciting and great place to work. And that's few people ever get to say that they were on the cutting edge of something, and that's really great. But at the end of the day, I hope that everyone just goes home and hugs their families, their children or whatever, and remember that whatever happens, I think in our businesses, what matters more is what we do, with the people that we love, people that we don't love, and kind of maybe remind ourselves, take a step back and say, there's to this, because sometimes I get the sense that people perhaps forget that, and then take things way too seriously, and tragedies happen as a result of it. And so I guess my only advice would be let's all remember that we're people. Let's be kind to one another. Let's remember why we want to make things better for people, so that we can push together, but push together responsibly.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that 100%. Gabe, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me.